Alright, so this will be part 1 to what if Deku had a stand as a quirk. So let me get into this real quick. It's not gonna be like a stand like normally, it's gonna be a stand as a quirk. So the normal rules to a stand don't really apply. So it's gonna act like Tokiyami's dark shadow more than like a regular stand. And this was like a suggestion. Like there was a comment that said, that asked for this what if, and then he gave me like a list of stands. So I just chose with the more interesting ones. Like there was a couple. I didn't want to do Star Platinum because that's pretty obvious, right? So I chose D4C. Okay, so D4C is one of the more complicated stands due to the nature of his abilities. It basically, if you were to do the most basic like idea, it could create a door between different dimensions. Not a physical door, but a door nonetheless. This is what I mean. Like you could go between the user needs to go between any two objects. It's very flexible with this ability. You could go between basically any two objects. Like there was a scene where he poured water on himself and he was in between the water and the ground, and he was able to go between dimensions. There's like a lot of things he could do with this. He could there's an ability that was kind of, I guess, forgotten about. He's able to be immune to like projectiles because holes would just appear where the shot would be. But then for some reason they never use this ability ever again. It's kind of like the Star Finger with Jotaro, and that one ability with Giorno, where if you're able to if you do like fatal damage to like one of his animals, then it gets reflected onto you. So I don't know, it was like forgotten about. But you might say like, well, in the next panel, he was able to get hit, but that's because it was some other person's ability that kind of nullify it, or not nullify it. He did like something where like split his body apart, and he wasn't able to, I guess, react to it. I don't know. So yeah. So when he's going to different dimensions, he's actually able to appear in other places. Like he was able to appear behind Diego's back. He can trap people within his dimension, between dimensions. If two things or if two people or a person like get in contact with each other, they have to be the same. Like if a parallel version of yourself or a thing create contact with each other, then they would actually collide, and then they would be ripped apart and turned into merger sponge, I think it's called. Basically it's like they would just be like erased, kind of. So yeah, that's like, there's other things like he's able to like switch places with people with his own like alternate versions. These are that rule about not being able to like make contact with yourself doesn't apply to the user. So he's able to like switch himself out with other versions if he's injured, like and he's also able to have multiple parallel universes in the same place at the same time. They could have them interact, and he's able to pull in like duplicates of himself. So the stats for D4C are an A in destructive power, an A in speed, a C in range, an A in everything is an A, but range. So that means it can evolve. So if you guys have any idea like for a new ability, since it has an A in potential, we could, give it more abilities as Deku grows up. So let's get into the what if. Sorry that took a long time. It's just complicated. Stand. Need to explain a few things and prove that these things actually happen so people don't call me out. So Deku, he's not born with this quirk. He actually unlocks it later on, around 5, when quirks are supposed to manifest for normal people. And they go to the doctor, right? And then Deku's able to release a D4C. He's actually able to release them. You know how like the sands can appear behind people, but it's like a younger version of D4C. So if you've seen part 3 of JoJo, you could see like there's like younger versions of the sands depending on how old you are, especially if it's like a punching ghost like D4C is, which he can like do like barrages of punches, but I'm not sure how strong they are, because even though he has an A in destructive power, it doesn't mean it's his physical strength. It could just mean the way that he's able to collide 2 different versions of things and make them like disappear. So they go to the doctor as usual, and they find out that Deku has a quirk and it's D4C, and his mom and him are so happy that they actually hug. And since Deku is between between his mom and the chair that he would be sitting in, he actually goes in between 2 dimensions. So this is when they the hospital wants to do more testing on it. So they eventually figure out that the way that it manifests, or the way that his ability is actually able to work, is that he has to be between 2 objects. So they want to test out like if he's able to bring other things. So he brings like a pen from his desk, the doctor's desk, and he gives it to Deku, and he goes between dimensions, and he makes contact with the same pen but in that dimension. And what happens is that they collide and turn into merger sponges. So the doctor's kind of shocked by this after Deku tells him what happens. So he tells Deku not to do this with living people, because if you do, they will most likely die because they are getting ripped apart. So Deku doesn't know at this point that he's actually able to switch with alternate versions of himself. So yeah, I don't think Deku would be kept for more study, because I believe there's other quirks that manipulate space and stuff like that. So I don't think he's that special, but he is unique because he has a stand like thing. So the stand itself does not have its own personality. So Deku doesn't really have like an idea to call his quirk. So him and his mom are like going back home. They take their car and they put on the radio, and this is when they actually listen to AC/DC, and it's the song Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. And Deku at this point, he thinks it's like pretty good and it's pretty catchy since it's an alliteration. So he decides to call his quirk that. I know that that's the best way I could keep it, as a name D4C. So the next day, when Deku goes back to like preschool, I think it's preschool, he basically shows off his quirk to Kachan or Bakugo, and he basically explains that he's able to go to different dimensions by going between two objects. And, you know, he can show like him like disappearing into between two objects and then reappearing somewhere else. It's not teleportation because it's like him like going to the different dimension, walking over to whatever that spot is, and then reappearing. So Bakugo is pretty amazed because it's a unique quirk, and he also has a punching ghost. So I think, since I'm gonna give like, let's just say that this young version of D4C is as strong as the regular D4C, so it's even more, it has even more potential since Deku's so young. So let's just say that D4C is as strong as Star Platinum, which he's able to destroy like walls or like giant teeth that are made from diamonds. So he's as strong as Star Platinum, because I couldn't really find any idea of how strong D4C should be, but since he has an A in destruction, we'll just say that he's as strong as Star Platinum and as fast. So as he's explaining this to Bakugo that he could dimension hop, he also tells him like, I could also do another thing, you know, and he shows D4C to him, and he's like, whoa, because it's pretty unique. Like there's not a lot of like characters in My Hero that have like a emitter quirks like that, or like a Dark Shadow. And he's like look what he could do, and he says D4C, and then what happens is he actually D4C, like a small like child version, like punches a tree and it actually knocks it down. So if you guys want me to draw like a child version of D4C, just tell me in the comments. So Deku is actually seen to have a really powerful quirk, you know, and he's actually able to like show people he's able to like pull other Dekus from other like universes or dimensions, you know, and the other kids, you know, want to try, you know, they ask Deku to like pull other versions of them, but he says, I can't because you could die. And they're pretty shocked. They're like, what do you mean? And he goes to a different dimension and gets a rock, and he gets the same rock from their dimension, and they get them close to each other, and they like, you know, collide and turn into merger sponges, and people are shocked, right? And Deku's like, this is what's gonna happen if you touch the other version of yourself, but it doesn't apply to me. So, you know, through messing around with the other Dekus, Deku actually learns that he's able to switch between them. They don't have this like, they don't have the same consciousness, but when he switches off between them, they get all the memories and all the pursuits of the original, and it gets the same personality. So it's like copy and pasting yourself to a different version, I guess. So he basically learns this, right? And throughout, you know, up until like middle school, he doesn't really use it because his body's not gonna like, it's not gonna be that different because you're a kid. And throughout his, you know, childhood, he's actually pretty popular because all the things he could do. And Kacchan, he's still praised as a kid, so he's still pretty arrogant, and he sees Deku as like a rival because they're close friends, and Deku can really like dodge any of his attacks because of the nature of his quirk. Because if Bakugo like explodes anything near him, then he's between smoke and like the ground, so he could just use his D4C ability, or he could just use D4C in general and just like hit him once, but like, you know, a low hits, right? Like not using his full force, and that could probably knock out Bakugo. So we get to the end of middle school, or the last day, and this is when the teacher like says, here are a bunch of forms for people who don't want to be heroes, but we all know you want to be heroes, so he throws them on the ground, and the kids who don't want to be heroes, pick them up, and he explains to the class that we have 2 people that want to go to UA. There's Deku and Bakugo. So in this version, I think Deku would get a recommendation to UA, because here's my justification for this. There aren't many people with quirks that could manipulate space, and we get this information from, I think it was Midnight during the USJ attack, where she commented on the teleporting villain. So it is rare for people to have things that manipulate space, and so I think he would get a a recommendation. And I believe that Deku would be taller and stronger, because I think he would switch himself out with a better version. We see this with Funny Valentine. We see a portrait of him where he's fat and short, and then later on it's they don't really say it, but it's implied that he used his D4C to get a better looking version of himself. So Deku is actually taller and stronger. I think he'd be the same height as Ida in this version. So Deku's walking home. He takes that shortcut as usual, and this is when the slime villain actually comes to attack. But since Deku, he would get surrounded by the sludge monster trying to invade his body. But since he's in between 2 objects, the slime and the ground, he would actually be able to use his D4C ability, and he would bring the slime monster halfway through the the doorway, and this would actually cause him to get stuck. And he would just basically, as he's doing this, he gives the idea of having the 2 versions of the slimes touch each other, but he doesn't want to kill, so he doesn't do that. So he comes through to the other dimension and basically says, I'm gonna wait until authorities come. So right when Deku's actually about to call the police, this is when a buff man comes through and says, I am here, and it's All Might. And he sees I think he would still admire him, but not to the point as it is in the anime. I think it'd be a little bit less, right? He still respects him and stuff like that. But then, All Might would see this really tall Deku, and he'd be like, oh, young man, I see that you captured the villain. Good work. Can I ask you what your quirk is? And then that's when he says, oh, I call my quirk dirty deeds done dirt cheap. And All Might's just taken back because he's never heard of a quirk like this. And he's like, wow, that's a mouthful. And he's like, yeah, I call it D4C for short. And he's like, oh, so what does it even do? He's like, oh, I could dimension hop. Oh, he's like, oh yeah, but that's pretty interesting. And he's like, yeah, but I can only do it between 2 objects. And then All Might says, or he doesn't say anything, and then Deku's like, here, check this out. And he goes, he gets he goes between 2 objects again. He takes off his school jacket and actually does that dive that Valentine's able to do, where he just throws the the American flag combined with him like not nose, I mean like jumping at the same time. So that's what he does, and he actually brings out other Dekus, and he's like, well, I might check this out. This is one of more dangerous abilities, and he takes a rock from this universe and then the other, and they basically combine, they collide, and they do that thing like before. And All Might's like pretty amazed. He's like, well, thanks for your help, kid. I'm sure you could be a great hero. And that's basically the end of their encounter. And All Might wouldn't, lose the bottle. So there is no point where the slime villain actually attacks Bakugo. So Deku isn't like put in a position where he has to save him, and All Might's not there to witness it. So Deku doesn't really know what's going to happen during the the what's it called, the exam to get into UA, the recommendation test. So he doesn't know what's going on, so he wants to like kind of train himself. So I think at this point all the stats are kind of the same, but the difference is that the development potential actually goes down to a B since he learned some new things, and I think the range would be at a B since I think that's part of his development potential. If not, I'll just keep it the same as 2 meters. And I say during this training, Deku actually learns a new ability. I just gotta come up with it, right? And if you guys have any idea of any abilities you want to give Deku, just put it in the comments. But it has to relate to D4C, right? And I think D4C's like physical like punches would be stronger at this point, since they were as strong as Star Platinum as a kid. So I think he's easily like way stronger now. I don't think he's as strong as All Might, but I think he's comparable. And speed, combat speed, I think he's also comparable. Not to like a prime All Might, but the one that we have now. So I think with training, it would basically be regular training, like how he does in the anime, like physically training, that's what I mean. And I think you try to like train his like stand by finding different ways he's able to go in between dimensions, and how fast he's able to like appear in different parts, because I don't know how fast he can reappear in a different place. So if you guys know, tell me. So in this, what if, like I said, he switched himself out with a stronger version of Deku, so he's a lot physically stronger and faster. And I think D4C would be, I just wanted to make him green since his hair is green. So yeah, so I think I'll end it here, and then in the next part I'll go over kind of the rest of the testing and how he gets in. So yeah.